Good morning, students. Myself, Dr. Vijayendra Singh Tawar, Associate Professor in English. Presently, I have been posted at Government College, Guda, in the Jhanjanu district. In the series of video lectures which I am preparing, this video lecture is meant for the students of English Literature, Class BA Part 2nd, Paper 1st. And the topic which I have chosen is the critical appreciation of a famous poem of William Blake entitled London. Very short poem, but very important poem, which is prescribed for BA Part students of English literature. First of all, let us know something about William Blake. William Blake was born in 1757 and died in 1827. Was an English poet, painter, and printmaker. He was one of the most complex and controversial poets of the 18th century. Largely unrecognized during his lifetime. When he was alive, he was unknown. He was not able to get any kind of popularity. Blake is now considered a seminal figure in the history of both the poetry and visual arts of the Romantic age. Considered mad by contemporaries for his idiosyncratic views, Blake is held in high regard by later critics for his expressiveness and creativity and for the philosophical and mystical undercurrents within his work. Means he wanted to express something deep, and the language he uses was very simple. Some of his poems are said to be written like nursery rhymes. His poems are very simple, but they express deep thoughts and philosophy. He drew his richest inspiration from nature, but he combined with it a mystical temperament which imparted a rapturous quality to that inspiration. He is famous for his two books of poems, namely Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience. The first book deals with the beautiful world of infancy, innocence, childhood, and happiness. The idea is innocence means it is related with innocent people. There is no cruelty, there is no mystery, etc. All are happy, simple people. But the second book, that is Songs of Experience, deals with the cruel and harsh world. In this world, there is only cheating. Nobody can be believed in. The poem entitled London is one of the most famous poems of William Blake. It was written during the times of French Revolution and showed his views of 18th century London, a place where he lived nearly all his life and was published in the volume of poems entitled Songs of Experience in 1794. Now you can imagine that this poem was published at that time, 1794, when there were laws and peoples were supposed to obey the laws. They could violate the law at the penalty of death. The poem has a total of 16 lines, which are split into 4 paragraphs with a rhyming A-B pattern throughout the poem. Blake discards the common glorifying view of London and replaces it with his idea of truth. London is nothing more but a city strapped by harsh economic times where royalty and other venues of power have allowed morality and goodness to deteriorate, so that suffering and poverty are all that exist. The poem is a devastating and concise political analysis, delivered with passionate anger, revealing the complex connections between pattern of ownership and the ruling ideology, the way all human relationships are inescapably bound together within a single destructive society. That is, we have created a society. This society is the result of human brain, and this brain has created certain rules and regulations. These rules and regulations create certain ban or restrictions on human beings, and human beings find themselves in such a situation where society becomes more important and human becomes secondary. He is given no place. Now let us do the poem. The speaker wanders through the streets of London and comments on his observation. Means what he sees, he describes before us. He sees despair in the faces of people he meets and hears fear and repression in their voices. Means poet or the speaker or the narrator is walking in the street and he sees many people and he finds them sad. It is with sarcasm that Blake describes the sights he sees. Sarcasm in the sense, the repetitive use of the word chartered stresses Blake's anger at the political times and his feelings towards the ruling classes with their controlling laws and oppressive views. Charter actually was a royal charter by which human beings or society people were given certain rights, but the reality is just the opposite. He taunts in the poem to say that it is not only every state that they want to control, but even the river Thames, which should normally be free for all, but in this case, it too is chartered. Means human beings or the political class, the controlling class of the society wants everything under its control. Thomas Paine had stated in his best-selling Rights of Man the year before, it is the perversion of terms to say that a charter gives rights. It operates by a contrary effect, that of taking rights away. He notices the faces of his fellow men that pass by him and finds their countenance discolored by feebleness. He finds in the cries of children man the replica of man's own sinful deeds. He also notices that men are fettered by the chains they have forged for themselves. It is they who have invented the society which now oppresses them. As I have told you, that human beings created society by the use of their brain. And in society, they form certain rules and regulations. These rules and regulations are a kind of chains or restrictions on human beings, that human beings should not do this, that, etc., etc. In this way, they oppresses the human being. Nothing is lack of free expression, and he uses the word ban, which is quite clear in its meaning and reveals how people were unable to voice their criticisms on how the country was being ruled. No one dared to speak out for fear of being imprisoned. The word fear, cry, ban, and mind forced miracles describe people who are suffering and frightened, and their feelings are imprisoned in their own minds. The idea is the same idea has been stated by great political thinker Rousseau, who said man is born free, but he finds himself in chains everywhere. The same thing is noticed by our poet William Blake, that people on the face it appears that they have the rights, but if we go into the depth of the things, we find that they are not free. In the third stanza, he talks about the chimney sweepers. Chimney sweepers were actually boys of 4 or 5 years. They were compelled or forced to clean the chimneys, and During that process, many children were injured and died, but there was no pity for them. Later on, it was banned by the law. The helpless soldier, that unlike his finger of blame points to places of authority like the church and the palace. The word appalls, sighs, and runs in blood, so authority being immune to its common people who are in distress, but there seems to be no comfort coming their way. The chimney sweep represents the destitute children, while the soldier represents the anguish of those who had to serve in the army under difficult conditions. Their blood is being spilt down the palace walls, while the cries of the suffering children are blackening are the church which should bring light to its people. The combination of helpless on one side and the unhearing authority on the other is both stark and accusatory in its tone. In the final stanza, Blake takes on an even more foreboding tone as he talks about the young girl who is out in the darkness of the night walking the streets. Young women had to resort to prostitution because of poverty, and he can hear her curses for what he has to be put through. Her grief affects the newborn child, and he uses powerful words like blast, which is a contrast to the gentleness one would use for the newborn child. It is as if he can foresee the difficulties the child will have to suffer, just like his mother is doing. In contrast, a rich woman getting married in a carriage will be blighted by this curse, and her carriage might turn out to be hers. Blake is pointing to a finger at the rich man who might use services of a prostitute and then got married and pass on disease to their wives. He uses the word plagues to signify the goings on of the rich and how their action affect the lives of all the innocent people involved. The idea is it is the compulsion, or you can say poverty under compulsion, that people have to do immoral things. And these immoral things do not stop up to them. They pass on from them to the rich people, and the rich people also suffer. Nobody can save himself or herself from this curse. But this is exemplified by giving the example of the newly born baby. The newly born baby, either that baby is born by the prostitute or by a, you can say, traditional married woman. The child will have no future because either he will get some disease. Disease can be medical or can be physical or social. He will have to live in those diseases. They will not be happy at any time. The poem, no matter how brutal and harsh in its message, has relevance even in modern times in societies where there is poverty due to large discrepancies in incomes between the rich and the poor. Now let us analyze it critically. The first is form of the poem. It is a short poem. It consists of 4 stanzas. Each stanza has 4 lines. In each stanza, the first line rhymes with the third line and the second line rhymes with the fourth. The rhyme scheme of each stanza is ABAB. Repetition is most striking formal feature of the poem, and it serves to emphasize the prevalence of horrors the speaker describes. Imagery. The poet gives us the terribly distinct images of the child chimney sweeper, the blackening church, the youthful harlot, and the marriage heiress. All these images are very terrifying. The entire speaker subjects, man, infant, chimney sweeper, soldier, harlot, are known only through the traces they leave behind. The ubiquitous cries, the blood on the palace wall, the sign of human suffering around, but a complete human form, the human form that Blake has used repeatedly in the songs to personify and render natural phenomena is lacking. In the third stanza, the cry of the chimney sweep and the sigh of the soldier metamorphose almost mystically into soot on church walls and blood on palace wall. But we never see the chimney sweep or the soldiers themselves. Likewise, institutions of power, the clergy, the government are rendered by synecdoche, by mention of the palaces in which they reside. Indeed, it is crucial to Blake's commentary that neither the city's victims nor their oppressors ever appear in body. Blake does not simply blame a set of institutions or a system of enslavement for the city's woes. Rather, the victims help to make their own mind-forged manacles more powerful than material chains could ever be. The poem climaxes at the moment when the cycle of misery recommences in the form of a new human being starting life. A baby is born into poverty, to a cursing, a prostitute mother, sexual and marital union, the place of possible regeneration and rebirth are tainted by the blight of venereal disease. Thus, Blake's final image is the marriage is a vehicle in which love and desire combine with death and destruction. Simplicity. Blake's songs are as simple as nursery rhymes, yet they are as profound as gospels. In the second stanza, the poet emphasizes the all-round suffering that he sees simply by repeating the word every 5 times. As he says, in every cry of every man, in every infant's every fear, in every voice, in every band, the mind for his miracles I hear. Criticism of society. The poem represents Blake's criticism of society, the whole trend of contemporary civilization, cruelty, hypocrisy, poverty, misuse of institutions, frustration of desire is associated with evils which combine to corrupt and destroy society. As the poet writes, I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet, mark of weakness, marks of pessimism. The poet notices woe and weakness in the faces of Londoners. Instead of pleasures and joy more than an isolated case of London, the poem reveals the reality of society as a whole. It is most forcefully expressed in the poem's concluding stanza, but most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot scars blast the newborn infant's tear and blights with plagues the marriage here is. In conclusion, it can be said that it is an anti-vision poem, but it implies that a vision is needed and this lifts it out of despair. Its rising anger reaching its height in the Shakespearean last line is like a battle cry or at least the precursor to one. It doesn't just catalog the woes, but by ordering the encounter reveals their cause and their interconnection. It shows the power of articulation both in the victim's utterances, the sweep, soldier, harlot marking the city by blackenings, splashing their throat, blood infecting it, and in the poem's own rhetorical eloquence. In short, Blake seems to have been influenced by Rousseau's views about society and its evil effects on men. There is no moralizing in the poem. It only shows us that shameful picture of society. The society in London is corrupt, the society itself is responsible for it.